All right, let me pull this up. So,
Here's the question, if you want to just run the recording off of that, you can.
it doesn't matter. So, as a kid, what inequalities were you able to recognize in your school? One thing that I thought of right away was just inequalities in terms of abilities of students, and not really technology, I guess, but the math facts thing, because it took me so much longer. And then it was like, stand up when you're done, but I was always the last one to stand up or never stood up, in terms of inequalities that way.
The one thing, because I'm a little bit older than you are, and we're
Yeah.
probably similar in age, but the one thing I can remember here is that, like, we had a computer in the school on a cart, and you'd roll the computer into the classroom. So, like, on Tuesdays, it would be Mrs. Just Day for the computer. And if you got done with your work early, you got access to play Oregon Trail or whatever was on the computer that day. And so the one thing that it did was, I was always a fast reader, so I could whip through whatever we were doing and get to the computer before everybody else. And there was a whole bunch of kids. Now, it got to be a point where it was like, it's your day on the computer, it's your day on the computer. But right away, that wasn't the case. So there was a whole bunch of kids that didn't get access to the computer or get to play with it, you know what I mean? Because they couldn't read as fast as I could, basically.
That's sort of what Kaylin talked about, right? With the, letting your kids that struggle do the fun things too, instead of always the remedial work, giving them the opportunity at the computer, even though you weren't as fast.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that, because like I said, we had a computer on the cart that got wheeled into a room.
I guess the computer thing stands out. We were probably one of the few families that had a computer at home at the time. That was not common at the time. And I can remember when I did my undergrad, I was in a class and the professor asked, how many of you remember growing up with a computer in the house? And he specifically said, I didn't count when he asked students to raise their hands, because he knew I was older and he knew my dad was a computer person, and he knew that there was it would skew the data. So just having that access and availability, and I think that on some of those things that really gave us an advantage going, like once it became common to see it in the classroom, even as the computers were going from room to room, or as you all like truck down, this is your hour to go down to the computer, you got done typing, you got to do something else. But and I guess the one at home, there were educational programs, but there were not a lot of games. There, a lot of them were, I guess. There were some educational games, and then there was like the Oregon Trail, but I don't remember, like now it's almost all like for fun video games that a lot of people have on their computers. But there were some specific ones that were meant to like help you learn to read or help you get better at your math facts.
And they had some of those too. But I can remember two in particular. I remember it was like when I was young, Oregon Trail. And then as you got older and computers became a little bit more advanced, you had like Carmen Sandiego, where you played in geography. You know what I mean? So you had a little bit fun. Hopefully it takes something out of it too.
Do you do Netflix?
Yep.
They have Carmen Sandiego on Netflix, and you can like, as it's playing, it'll say, okay, you're the age, what do you do? And so on Netflix, you have to pick your route. So it's really changed from some of those older games.
Okay, so last week many students talked about equity issues between high flyers and low students. When adjusting for equity, how do you ensure that students at all levels are being considered? Reflect on the labels of high flyers and low students. I feel like that's the biggest struggle, right, in differentiation, is that you are hitting the kids at all levels. One thing for my class personally is I tried doing, where my high flyer kids are going deeper with the content, and then, my students that are with me like go do a similar project, or maybe we don't get to that, so my high flyer kids are sharing what their going deeper thing was about or whatever. But obviously still equity issues with my kids that are with me not getting to do that fun thing or that extra thing, I guess.
That's a, I don't know, because you spend so much time with your students that struggle to try and get them up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to justify taking time away from them to expose them to other things like we've kind of talked about. And I understand why, I never really thought about it until we got to this class, honestly, is because it's like, okay, this person, it's hard to justify go do the fun thing when you're failing my class,
Mm-hmm.
or go do the other thing. But the other part of it that kind of resonated with me is the fact that if you let them do the fun thing, they might be more engaged in your class, and then they might raise their, it might spark that interest to get them to go to the next step on their own, instead of, there's a handful of those kids that you gotta drag into, you gotta drag them along. They don't, it's like walking a dog that, wants to go over there and smell something. You're like, no, you're gonna get hit by a car, and you gotta drag them back. There's a handful of kids in class that you gotta like drag them along because they have no desire, interest to do any of those things.
I wonder if some of that's like with personalized learning, right? Where you have like your groupings of kids, like you guys are all working on this standard, you guys are all working on this standard. And then the teacher kind of like, for the first 10 minutes of class, I'm with this group. For the next 10 minutes, I'm with this group. And the next 10 minutes, I'm with this group, or whatever, dividing out their time. And then it rotates for the next day. Like I've done that with my kids. Like, you guys get started in the front, I'm going to go with the kids in the back, and we're going to kind of recap what they're doing, and then I'll switch. And I try to rotate that, where they're not always the first group or the last group.
I guess the two things that come to mind are, you were saying it's hard to justify. It hadn't really clicked for you to make them go do that other project. But to do that fun project, or to do that more advanced project, they need those basic skills. So to just say, we're going to go do this project, and if you need help, then it might take you a little longer, but I'll help you along the way, or I'll answer questions as they come up. Maybe that's how to get them through that, because that's still meeting those standards then of whatever you're trying to hit for the standard. They might have to, if they're frustrated, you're going to help them out more, but some of them might kind of hammer it out on their own if they get to do the fun project. They'll figure out some of the other things. The other thing that comes to mind with this is high flyers and low students. We've labeled them. And that turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point.
Yeah, they're not, I don't.
I'm dumb. I'm not good enough.
No, but
So
I guess
that's gonna come up at some point.
for me, they already have that perception when I get to them.
What age group is that?
Junior seniors.
Okay, I'm high school, but if you're starting in elementary, then you're the good reader. You're struggling with some math. You don't know your verbs from your adjectives. Whatever it is, you've given them. And we need to have some way to distinguish between them as the instructors to know who might need more help. But no matter how you do it, you're going to label them. And when they start hearing those labels from other people, they're going to start buying into that.
I think some of that maybe would be like our growth mindset stuff where, understanding like it's okay that I'm not at your level, and it's okay that you're not at my level. Like, what I need is what I'm getting, and like I'm not there yet, but maybe
that's
the next standard we have, I'm going to be above you and you're going to be above me, or whatever.
The hard part about it is not necessarily the labels that we
it's the mindset
put on them. It's the labels. It's when they know.
Mm-hmm.
Like they know that if I'm significantly smarter at a topic than you are, and I know it.
Mm-hmm.
Because at some point throughout the course of the material, you're going to be exposed. And how you got to present, you got to show it at some point.
At some point, they're going to get exposed to it, but by calling them highs and lows, it sounds like we've almost condemned them. You must stay in this category, and woe to you if you fall, and you'll never be able to crawl out.
Yeah. Part of it is the fact that they don't. Because of the different programs that schools have in place, things like interventions and eligibility lists, and, you know, you can't, in a perfect world, everybody, you know what I mean, would be on a level playing field and you wouldn't have those, but it's one of those things where, not me labeling them, they label each other.
At some point,
and so,
but I'm thinking even early elementary.
even in early
First
elementary,
grade,
when-
second grade, third
like,
grade.
like for us, we have the leveling issue where it's like, okay, well, you're at this, so you know what I mean? You're not necessarily, everything isn't peer oriented, because it's one of those deals where that's not the way it works. So they all know where their struggles are.
I think it's more about helping them with their mindset and less about the terms
Yes,
being used and the labeling of that. I mean, it's being okay with where you're at
yes,
and, you know, realizing that you can grow, like you can dig out of that hole. And I mean, I have multiple kids, right, that are like, oh, I'm no good at science. And I'm like, but you know all of these things about everything I don't know about, like cattle and farming and, you know.
No, but it's not that you're no good at it, it's that it's new. It's challenging. It's not that you suck at it, it's not, and it might be hard, it might be a struggle, but it's new. It's not an impossibility.
But for some kids, like school's just not their thing, right?
That's
And
fine too, but you
it's
can, you
just-
can do it. You can get through it. That's part of that growth mindset.
and some can't,
I don't know if I believe they can't.
some can't. Some don't have the tools in order to do it.
I think nowadays there's enough help out there to do it.
Depending on if you want to do it, which goes into your growth mindset. But it's one of those deals where, you know, there's some kids that are.
You have to want to.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. But
Yeah. Because, like the old saying goes, you can lead a horse to water. Can't make it drink. And so they have to, you know, and part of the thing that we go through is that growth mindset. I got a handful of students that's like, okay, well, here's what you got to do. And I lay it out in very simple terms and like step by step, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they can't get past step 1 because, oh, it's too hard, I can't do it. Or, oh, I tried it once before and I didn't succeed, so now I'm never, you know what I mean? So that's easy enough to overcome. There's also a handful of kids that don't possess the tools to do step 1.
And I think for some of those kids, right, like, I mean, we've had kids that, you know, their families own a business or, you know, they're very well-to-do farmers, so they
Okay.
just do the bare minimum because what do they need to know is those farming skills and how to run equipment and how to operate a business and how to do those things that are hands-on skills that they're getting outside of our building
Yep.
when they leave and they go to work on the farm.
and that's fine, but that's not to say you can't do the project or you can't graduate high school.
No,
Which they still do,
Yep.
right?
but they don't have the same goals and aspirations for their academic success as we might as teachers have. For,
No, I'll give you that. I'm just, when you're saying some of them can't, no, you can. You can do the project, you can
not all of them
graduate high
can.
school.
There's literally a handful of kids that I have that cannot, don't possess the skills. And I've also, I can tell you this as
Skills
a,
or motivation?
skills. I'm taking this from two different. There's not that big an issue in Oaks, but like literally, I have coached football players that read at a 3rd grade level and have a high school diploma. So they do not have the ability to X, Y, Z because they've never made it that far down the path. Like if you know, it's one of those deals where if I took this information, I can tell you, I can give you a good example. So I taught a unit on leadership this
Okay.
semester in my POD class, seniors in high school. And I took a lesson that I taught in college and I taught it to them. I broke it up into pieces, but I taught that same lesson. And it's one of those deals where I taught that lesson, what I would do in a 50-minute class, a 50-minute lecture in
At a
college.
yeah.
It took me a week
Mm-hmm.
to cover that same information,
Or longer sometimes.
or longer sometimes. Okay, so the same, no, that's with kids who are all at about the same level. You know what I mean? Like if I tried to teach that same lesson to a kid who read at a third grade level in 50 minutes and expected him to retain anything from that, he does not possess the ability to do that.
No, but that doesn't mean he can't get through the lesson. I mean, if you made it a week for the seniors, maybe that kid needs 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get through it. But he can do it.
He can, maybe.
How much time and effort is he going to put into it?
How much time are you going to allow him to do it? So you got one kid that's
Graded
here
at the end of
and
the semester, and if you
one
want
kid
to come
that's
in and
here?
reassess,
I mean, but you
knock
also,
your socks off. You schedule the time. You can find time in my calendar. We'll do it.
but I mean that's also the thing with personalized learning, I guess, is that as you go through it, you can have kids on wide, but also
But you have a
you
minimum pace.
you can't just do whenever and get caught up on your clock, because that is counterproductive to the rest of.
Oh no,
the
we're going to
students.
keep going, but you can come
So
in.
but now you understand the issues that, okay, so if we start a race, and we start this race right here,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden a week from now I'm here, and then I'm at the wall and you're still there, what are the odds of you getting to me? Regardless.
How badly do you want it? I've had kids pull themselves up in the last couple,
Yeah, I get it.
month of class by coming in during their study halls
But
and coming in during their
But they have the ability.
ICU time. The ability isn't the question.
And I'm saying for some kids, the ability is the question.
Maybe.
All right. Question 3.
Okay.
You're in a team of third grade teachers. In your PLC, one of your colleagues is complaining about how kids' home life is affecting their academic performance. As an educational leader, how would you coach the conversation to become solution focused? So one thing I thought about was what supports can we offer the kid or the family to help remedy the situation? And I know that there have been I don't know, I feel like Anna told us once that somebody had paid off school lunch accounts and a parent was PO'd. Because to them that was saying they didn't have the money to afford it, but I mean, they really didn't. But they were super offended by that gesture. So, I mean, I think obviously tread lightly, but I think it would be a good idea to talk about what the problem is or what they're seeing and what viable solutions can be provided to either help the kid at school or to help the family best remedy the situation or help in that time of struggle. And I know some teachers you have a drawer of snacks, so a kid comes in and grabs a granola bar because they don't get breakfast every day or whatever. That's not really an issue here, but those types of things would be something that you can fix, right? If your kid complains at 9 a.m. that they're hungry, I mean,
There's the basket.
yeah, I mean, I had kids this year I'm starving, and it wasn't an issue of social economic status. It was I know your family and whatever, you just didn't eat. And I'm oh, I got a muffin in a cup. Here's my microwave. Mix it up and eat it,
I kept Rice Krispie bars and stuff like that in a little basket.
Yeah, but that would be one way I guess I would try to steer the conversation is instead of complaining about the situation, what solutions can we generate to try to help?
Oh, complaining never does anything.
Right.
It's just,
Well,
you just voice your frustrations, but there's never a solution to it.
Makes you feel better sometimes.
It does make you feel better.
Well, it's also a way to bring the issue to light, too. Maybe the issue hasn't come up until that point.
But typically, complaining is something that you can't really do anything about. But this is a situation where you can do something,
Potentially.
yeah.
Potentially.
And one of the things that, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that I've thought of is that I started to do a little bit more of after I became more familiar with some of our students and some of the obstacles they were having is we did more kind of like what we talked about in class with the flip your tech, where it was more tech at school, where you didn't need that same internet access and some of those same pieces at home. So I made sure that if we had something that was research based or something where they needed to go on Google and they needed to do that and they needed to get the research so that they could go on research, download the articles, go home and work on the presentation. You know what I mean? So I made sure I gave them enough time to overcome some of those issues. The other thing that, because we had a handful of it this year with the kids' home life is affecting their academic performance. Well, kids go through like their parents getting divorced, and you know what I mean, some of those type of things where you just have to kind of be aware and trying to help them work through the process without, you know, not necessarily be their counselor, but be aware that, hey, this is going on. So they have bigger fish to fry right now, where somebody's parent dies, or, you know, grandma died, you know what I mean? And if they're already kind of predisposed to emotional issues, then, you know, I can think of one of our girls in the junior class this year that has some issues emotionally, and then you stack things on top of it where you got to be a little bit understanding with that. You're like, no, it's due on Tuesday. It has to be in Tuesday. You know,
Stuff like that, I tend to tell my students, deal with the home life first. When you get back, let's set up a plan, because if English is more pressing, my class will wait. Because I'm willing to spend that extra time later on in the semester if I have to. The other thing that comes to mind with this is we've had one or two students who had some hygiene issues, and so they were allowed to like shower at the school in the morning or keep a bag. Like there were some financial concerns, so like one of the staff I think went to Dollar General, made sure that there was like shampoo and deodorant and stuff in a, you know, special locker off the main gym area that she could go to. So there's been some stuff like that.
All right. What time-honored practice are you currently implementing that should be discontinued, and why? Do you want me to start?
I have no thoughts on this one.
One thing for me personally, obviously, would be teacher-centered. You know, me driving everything that we do instead of my students driving what we do. And, you know, that would be just personalized learning in general, but the ability to allow my students to have more choice and more control than I have is one of my big things.
I'd agree with that. For me, the personalized learning piece, being my first year in teaching high school and really encountering the concept, not necessarily encountering the concept, but have it be more of a mandate than what I was used to teaching has been a struggle for me, because I'm used to teaching very teacher-centric, information-driven
At the university
lessons.
level, we are.
Yeah, I mean and so that's what I was used to teaching. So for me, I'm still struggling with some of those things, and I don't think I can ever discontinue it completely. I'm attempting ways to give them a little bit more control over the process and kind of how we do some of those things. And like one of the things that we started to do is, one of the things I started to do is like, okay, so if we're going to do presentations and projects on this bank of knowledge, you're not going to be tested on this bank of knowledge, you know, so we don't have to go through, you don't have to list every battle of the Civil War and how, you know, because we're going to do presentations on that. Now there's going to be questions and discussions and whatever that are going to be based around every one of these presentations, but I'm not going to test you on the Battle of Antietam unless it's a very specific thing that you need to know that meets a standard that we're currently covering for the class. Which I will cover in class separately, saying, okay, now this is like the thing you need to know. But for me, here it's a big deal, and it's the thing that I struggle with the most, because that's something that I'm not used to doing.
I mean, like with my 8th graders, where I have them like decide, do you want to be in the back of the room and work at your own pace, or do you want to be with me and have me teach it to you? You know, it's interesting to see like day 1 kids choose to be in the back, and then by like day 3 they're like, actually I've changed my mind, can I be with you? Yep, sure, come on, like let's do it. You know, so that's kind of cool to give them that agency, and then they get a really good idea of what they understand. Or like then they'll take a test and be like, I shouldn't have been in the back, you know. So those types of things for those kids. So that's sort of my why, obviously, and all of our PCBL stuff is, you know, for student engagement, it needs to be things that students are interested in and not things that I'm interested in.
One of the things I struggle with is, honestly, I can think of probably about 7 kids that are like interested in the history, politics. You know, it's not a ton. of kids. Like you're more drawn to other things.
Maybe they need to do like the politics of like a prominent family and tie that to actual, like the Kardashians versus
They were like so
government
we did right away at the beginning of the year because there was a presidential election coming up and some of them were able to vote. We did like broke down all the two parties and all the political platform issues that they had and went back and forth, and so they were engaged in that to a point. You know what I mean? But the other thing is like a lot of them, because one side is like because the Christian conservative Republican is so strong in Oaks, like that's the baseline. Republican, like really right wing Republican is because I made him take a test and it was like 6% of the population is this, and it's like super conservative, but like 80% of our class, the senior class, was in that category. It precluded some of the people on the other side from actually speaking out and having a discussion. So what I had to do is I had to assign your political group to you and make you argue on behalf of, and then I would have to supplement those arguments, because it's hard to argue for something that you don't truly believe in without a lot of information, because you just have surface information. This is what it is.
Sure.
So I spent a lot of time arguing the Democratic standpoint from political platform issues, and because they needed to know both sides, because they don't know. Like most kids don't know where they are on the political spectrum. They know where their parents are,
Right.
And they just follow where their parents are.
Yeah.
The ones that I would be interested in seeing is if you have like the mom that votes Republican and the dad that's a Democrat, and see which way the kid leans. That would be kind of interesting, but it's mainly everybody votes Republican.
Yeah.
I guess on that note, I can remember when I think I was in 6th grade. It was an English project, and the teacher had chosen very controversial subjects, and you had to pick a topic. And I don't know if she picked pro or con, or if that was something you got to pick. But you were basically going to research and debate it. So I mean, we had some time to do some research, not just the class period, but. Luckily, the grade was not based on how well you could sway the class, because my topic was pro-choice. So
that's one thing. It was a lot of. They were very.
there were some pretty. I mean, for 6th grade, that was some pretty controversial stuff at the time. I don't remember some of the ones were. Some weren't that bad. Not that rough, I guess.